Croft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. Previously, Ambassador Dobriansky served as Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs for 8 years. Ambassador Dobriansky, welcome. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Nowruz Mubarak to all. To all Iranians and Iranian Americans gathered here today. And I hope that this very day brings health, happiness, and prosperity to each and every one of you, your families, and your loved ones. The holiday of Nowruz, I want to take a moment on that because we are in Nowruz, has been celebrated by Iranians for more than 3,000 years, marking the arrival of spring. And in 2009, did you know that UNESCO listed the holiday on its representative list of the intangible cultural heritage of humanity, and noting that it promotes values of peace and solidarity between generations and within families, as well as reconciliation and neighborliness. I want to devote my comments today especially to the women and daughters of Iran. We know that on September 16, 2022, Mahsa Zina Amini, a 22-year-old Iranian woman, an aspiring lawyer, was visiting her uncle in Tehran. And during her family visit, she was arrested by Iran's so-called morality police for allegedly wearing her hijab in a way that made some of her hair visible. While in custody, we know that she died. Witnesses of her arrest describe her having been beaten repeatedly and brutally by the police before she slipped into a coma. The U.S. representative to UNESCO, Ambassador Lisa Carty, she cast this as she was killed for the crime of being simply a woman, hence spotlighting that the regime assumed that Mahsa's death would be just another statistic, in addition to the regime's horrible, egregious, long record of violence against women. However, two brave women reporters, Nolafar Hamidi and Elaha Mohammadi, told Mahsa's story. And to this day, the morality police said she died of heart failure. But the Iranian people know otherwise. They know that this kleptocracy in power is corrupt, it's tyrannical, it's brutal, and they lie. But Mahsa did not die in vain. Her savage murder prompted months of grassroots, relentless, courageous, women-led protests against Iran's 31 provinces. It has truly sparked an uprising, a revolution. And in the mere days following her death, Iranian men, women, and girls, but especially the women and girls of all ages, took to the streets, removing and burning their hijabs and cutting their hair. Their braveness, defiance to the regime, led to a blood-curdling response by the police, who, according to Amnesty International, slaughtered hundreds of peaceful protesters, including in that mix around 70 children. I bet that number is higher. The State Department cast this as state-sponsored violence against women, and which has a long history. Yet Mahsa's brutal killing touched a nerve in Iranian society, galvanizing a protest movement. And we know the protests have raged on, and they will rage on. Those brave souls are still on the streets. They're chanting, "Women, life, freedom." A freedom revolution is indeed underway. Last week, it's very fitting to discuss this and why I chose this aspect today, because March 8th, last week, was International Women's Day. And this very month, we celebrate Women's History Month. So given these commemorative days, we have to recognize and honor the brave women and girls of Iran. Our Secretary of State, on the occasion of International Women's Day, had said, the U.S. stands in solidarity with women of Iran, who remain undaunted despite the Iranian regime's brutality. And it's worth noting that, in fact, in every International Women's Day, the State Department hosts the annual International Women of Courage Awards. This was a tradition that was launched in the George W. Bush administration. In this year's celebration and ceremony, the Secretary joined the First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, because the ceremony was hosted not at the State Department, but at the White House. And there, I was very delighted to see that the administration awarded the prestigious Madeleine Albright Honorary Group Award to the women and girl protesters of Iran, which was indeed the right thing to recognize here. And Condi Rice basically had said in virtual remarks that the women protesters of Iran make all women proud. And indeed, that's certainly how I feel. I also want to share with you that that same day, the administration had announced, in coordination with the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Australia, a series of new sanctions that are targeted against the law enforcement of Iran. And in particular, a number of very specific individuals in Iran's prison system were targeted for their serious human rights abuses against women and girls. The ongoing violence against Iranian mothers, sisters, daughters, John, you said that, mothers, sisters, and daughters must end. It must end now. I don't know if you know, but I want to remind the 54-member UN Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, adopted a resolution to remove Iran from the Commission on Status of Women. It was adopted by a recorded vote of 29 in favor to 8 against. The 8 against were Bolivia, China, Kazakhstan, Nicaragua, Nigeria, Oman, Russia, and Zimbabwe, and then with 16 abstentions. It is also worth noting that in October 2 years ago, 2021, the UN Special Rapporteur reported on the human rights situation in Iran, Javad Rehman, and he told the UN General Assembly in his report that almost all executions in the country constituted an arbitrary deprivation of life. And he noted the extensive, vague, and arbitrary grounds in Iran for imposing the death sentence, which quickly can turn this into punishment and into a political tool. Amnesty International has basically said that the regime, in February and in January and February alone, amid horrific sexual violence and other torture allegations, has executed at least 94. And that's based on, again, some scant information here. But there has been a notable rise in executions compared to the same time last year. And in recent days, we also know there have been countless reports about the poisoning of Iranian schoolgirls. I was struck by 2 gentlemen who I have followed their statements on Iran, Raoul Marc Garect and Ray Teke. They had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, and I mention it because specifically their op-ed says that out of the 31 provinces, that 25 have reported such outbreaks. It may even be more. But you know what they conclude? They conclude that the attacks, which have sickened thousands, are the latest evidence that the regime is losing grip, that it's losing grip, and it's had to take these kinds of extreme measures in this case. Many human rights organizations at this time have also spoken about the ongoing protests in Iran, including Freedom House. They issued actually a statement which apparently had been cast by some 480 global voices. And they're all from all across the globe. There were a number of Americans, but I'm going to mention the non-Americans. There was the former president of Costa Rica, Oscar Arias, former Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, and also the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon. And that specific letter, it calls upon governments, all governments internationally, to take diplomatic, economic, and symbolic measures to punish the regime and to support the protesters. Now is the time to give maximum support to those courageous men and women fighting for their freedom and the freedom of future generations in a democratic, secular, non-nuclear Iran republic. We know that also Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, that she has put forward a 10-point plan. And this is something that she has been very consistent on from the very beginning. Her 10-point plan, importantly, calls on the people of Iran to have freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom to choose their own leaders. And the people of Iran clearly want that, and they want protection of their fundamental rights. So those protesting in Iran have launched a movement which deserves strong support from the international community. Their courage, persistence, and steadfast determination will bring about the change which is desired by them and the change which is long desired by us. So as we come together celebrating the new year, let us be reminded of the strength and the conviction of all the freedom-loving peoples in Iran and all who are fighting for their basic rights and democracy. Let me conclude on this note with a quote from the ancient Persian poet Sadi Shirazi, who once wrote, quote, "Thank God the pleasant Nowruz breeze returned and freed us from the cold," unquote. That is what we are looking for. Thank you.